Sergeant Brock Dalton snatched the clippers off the table, held them up in front of 200 soldiers, and pointed them straight at the quiet man sitting in the middle of the yard. "You think you belong here, old man?" Dalton shouted. "Let's fix that." The crowd erupted in laughter. The man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't say a single word. He just looked up at Dalton with eyes so calm it almost felt like a warning. Nobody caught it. Nobody except one person. And 3 days later, that same man would bring the entire base to its knees. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you are new here, hit subscribe, because you do not want to miss what happens next. The bus pulled through the front gate of Black Ridge Military Base at 6:47 in the morning, 13 minutes behind schedule. That was the first thing Sergeant Brock Dalton noticed. He was already standing at the edge of the gravel lot with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and he had been standing there since 6:30. Not because he had to be. Nobody ordered Dalton to meet the new transfer. He chose to be there. He always chose to be there when someone new arrived, because the first 5 minutes told you everything you needed to know about a man. The bus groaned to a stop. The door folded open. 3 soldiers stepped off, each one young, each one moving with the stiff, uncertain energy of men who knew they were being watched and did not want to make a mistake. Dalton looked them over fast and dismissed them just as fast. Young. Trainable. Easy. Then the 4th man stepped off the bus. He was not young. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, maybe older, with a face that looked like it had been through weather and come out the other side without apology. Not tall, not particularly broad, just solid. The kind of solid that does not come from a gym, but from years of carrying weight that does not show up in any official record. He had a duffel bag over one shoulder and a manila folder tucked under his arm, and he stepped off that bus the way a man steps into a room he has been in before. Unhurried, steady, like the gravel under his boots was already familiar. Dalton did not like that. He walked straight toward the man before the man had taken 3 steps. "You're late," Dalton said. The man looked at him. Not up at him, not down at him, just at him, level and quiet. "Bus was delayed," the man said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that does not waste energy on volume. "I don't care about the bus," Dalton said. "I care that you were standing in my yard 13 minutes late on your first day. What's your name?" "Hayes. Daniel Hayes." Dalton took the folder out of Hayes's hand before Hayes offered it. He flipped it open, scanned it, and his brow came down slow and hard. The file was almost empty. Name, date of birth, blood type, a reassignment order with a signature he did not recognize from a department designation he had never heard of. No service history, no commendations, no disciplinary record. No unit designation prior to this one. Nothing. Dalton looked up. "This is your file?" "Yes, Sergeant." "There's nothing in it." "I know." "You know." Dalton closed the folder and held it against his chest. "You walk onto my base 13 minutes late with a file that's basically blank, and you stand there and tell me you know?" Daniel Hayes said nothing. He just waited. That bothered Dalton more than any backtalk would have. He was used to men who pushed back. He knew how to handle that. This quiet, this complete absence of reaction, this was something different. And Dalton's instinct told him that different was dangerous. He decided right then to break it. "Get your gear to Barracks 7, Dalton said. "Bottom bunk, far end, right corner. And Hayes," he waited until Hayes looked at him. "Don't make me come find you." Hayes picked up his duffel, tucked the folder back under his arm, and walked toward the barracks without another word. Dalton watched him go. Corporal Reyes came up beside him, a young woman with sharp eyes who had been standing a few feet back the whole time. "New transfer?" she asked. "Something like that," Dalton said. He was still watching Hayes walk. "Run me a deeper check on him. I want whatever they didn't put in that file." Reyes glanced at the folder in his hands. "Looks like a pretty thin file." "That's exactly the problem," Dalton said. Barracks 7 was not an accident. Every man at Black Ridge knew that Barracks 7 was where Dalton sent the ones he had already decided were not going to make it. The heating unit on the far wall had been broken for 4 months. The bunk in the right corner leaked when it rained, a slow drip from a crack in the ceiling that maintenance had been told about 11 times and repaired 0. The mattress on that bunk had been soaked through once in a rainstorm 2 weeks ago and had never fully dried. Private Leon Webb was the one who delivered that piece of information to Hayes, not out of kindness, but the way a cat drops a dead bird at your feet, with a grin and too much enthusiasm. "Corner bunk's yours, old man," Webb said, dropping Hayes's duffel on the wet mattress with a slap that sent a small spray of moisture into the air. "Hope you don't mind a little character." Hayes set his folder on the footlocker, looked at the mattress, pressed one hand against it, felt the damp, and said nothing. "What, you deaf?" Webb said. He was maybe 24, with the loud, restless energy of someone who needed an audience at all times. 3 other soldiers were watching from their bunks. "I said, hope you don't mind." "I heard you," Hayes said. "Then say something." "I don't have anything to say." Webb looked at the others. One of them, a thick-armed soldier named Kowalski, laughed from the back corner. "Maybe he's saving his voice for crying later," Kowalski said. Hayes pulled the wet mattress off the bunk, stood it against the wall to let it air out, and sat on the bare metal slats without any visible discomfort. He opened the manila folder, took out the single sheet inside, read it once, and put it back. "You're really just going to sit there?" Webb said. "Yes," Hayes said. "You know who Sergeant Dalton is?" "I know who he is." "Then you know what he does to people he decides he doesn't like." Hayes looked at Webb then, just for a moment, just long enough to make Webb shift his weight from one foot to the other, without understanding why. "I appreciate the warning," Hayes said. Webb opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Kowalski, and decided not to say anything else. Breakfast in the base cafeteria ran from 0530 to 0700, and Hayes arrived at 0610, which was well within the window. He took a tray, moved through the line, and asked for the same eggs and toast and coffee that every other soldier in front of him received. The server, a heavy-set man named Gruber, who ran the kitchen line under the unofficial supervision of Dalton's inner circle, looked at Hayes once, then turned around and filled his tray from a separate container that had been sitting apart from the main line. The eggs were cold. The toast was not toast. It was bread that had been left near heat long enough to dry out without actually browning. The coffee was water with a dark suggestion of flavor. Hayes carried his tray to an empty table, sat down, and ate everything on it without a word. Corporal Reyes was 3 tables away. She was watching, not obviously, the way a person watches when they are not sure themselves why they are watching. She had been trying to find more on Hayes since Dalton asked her that morning, and had come up with the same wall of nothing. Every avenue she ran into a designation she could not access. Not a wall of redactions, something cleaner than that. Like the information was not hidden, it was simply somewhere else, somewhere she did not have clearance to look. That alone told her something. She looked at the tray in front of Hayes. She looked at her own tray. She looked back at his. She stood up, walked over, and sat across from him. They gave you the cold batch, she said. I noticed, Hayes said. Does that bother you? He looked at her without hostility or warmth, just clear attention. Should it? Most people would say something. To who? She had no answer for that, and she knew it, and she could tell from the way he looked at her that he knew she knew it. She shifted. I'm Corporal Reyes, Maria Reyes. I know, Hayes said. You were standing behind Dalton this morning. Yeah, she paused. He asked me to look into your file. I know that too. She studied him. You're not going to ask what I found? I already know what you found, he said. Nothing. The way he said it was not a question. She put her fork down. What are you doing here, Hayes? He took a sip of the thin, flavorless coffee. Eating breakfast, he said. She almost smiled. She stopped herself because smiling felt like the wrong move, and she did not quite know why. You have a daughter, she said. It was not in the file. She had found it elsewhere, a small trace, a school enrollment record from Fort Bragg, 3 years old. A child named Emma Hayes, emergency contact listed as Daniel Hayes. Relationship? Father. Something shifted in Hayes's face, just briefly, the first crack in that flat, controlled surface. Yes, he said. How old? 8. He set his coffee cup down. She's staying with my sister. Must be hard, Reyes said, being away. He looked at her for a long moment. She understands duty, he said quietly. I made sure of that. Reyes wanted to ask more. Something stopped her. She picked up her fork and went back to eating, and they sat in silence for the rest of the meal, which should have been uncomfortable and somehow was not. The 6-mile run started at 0800 and was supposed to be standard. It was not standard. The formation was structured so that Hayes was placed in the second row, hemmed in on both sides. Dalton had arranged it without saying a word. The positioning communicated through glances and small nods, the way arrangements like that always are in a system built on unspoken authority. At the 2-mile mark, the men on either side of Hayes began to slow. Subtly at first, just enough to break the rhythm, force him to check his pace, create a gap between him and the row ahead. By 2.5 miles, the men behind him had closed in, boxing him from the back, so his only options were to break stride, fall back, or push through bodies that were not moving. He fell back. Not far, not dramatically, but he fell back, and that was enough for Dalton, who was running at the front, to turn and shout over his shoulder without breaking stride. Hayes, you are falling behind in a 6-mile run. What is that? Working through a blockage, Sergeant, Hayes said, and his breathing was controlled, which Dalton noticed and did not like. I don't see a blockage, Dalton said. I see a man who can't keep pace. The men laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Hayes said nothing. He adjusted his position, found a small gap, and pushed through it without contact, resettling into the formation 2 rows back from where he started. He did not try to reclaim the original position. He simply ran, and he finished the 6 miles in a time that was unremarkable on paper and would have been significantly faster without the deliberate obstruction. When the run ended and the men were catching their breath in the yard, Reyes moved up beside Hayes as he stretched. You know what they did, she said quietly. Yes, he said. You're not going to report it? He straightened and looked at her. To who? That was twice he had said that. She was starting to understand that it was not a rhetorical question. It was a calculation. Dalton runs up the chain, Hayes said. Not loudly, not so anyone else could hear. Briggs covers him. Anyone who reports Dalton goes through Briggs. Anyone who goes through Briggs gets a mark on their file and a transfer to somewhere worse. He looked across the yard to where Dalton was standing with Kowalski and Webb, all three of them watching him with the satisfied expressions of men who believe they are winning. "I'm not going to report it." "So you're just going to let them do what they want?" Reyes said. "For now," Hayes said. Something in his voice made her go quiet. That night, after lights out, Hayes lay on the bare metal slats of his bunk, with his hands folded on his chest and his eyes open in the dark. The wet mattress was still against the wall. He had not asked for a replacement. He had not complained. He had simply adjusted. From across the barracks, he could hear Webb whispering to Kowalski. "He didn't even flinch at the run," Webb was saying. "He fell back, though," Kowalski whispered back. "Because Diaz and Turnbull boxed him in. I saw it. He knew what they were doing." "So why didn't he say something?" A pause. "I don't know," Webb said. "That's the part that's weird." "Maybe he's just slow," Kowalski said. "No," Webb said. "He's not slow." Another pause, longer this time. "Kowalski," Webb said. "What?" "You ever get the feeling you're looking at a tiger in a zoo, and you're telling yourself it's a cat, because it's easier that way?" A long silence. "Go to sleep, Webb," Kowalski said. But Webb did not sound convinced. Across the barracks, Hayes stared at the ceiling. In the dark, where no one could see, something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear. Something more patient than either of those. He thought about Emma, 8 years old, staying with his sister in Raleigh. Probably asleep right now, with that threadbare blue elephant she had carried since she was 2. The one with the missing eye that she refused to let anyone fix because the missing eye was, in her words, what made it real. He thought about the last thing she said to him at the airport, standing on her tiptoes with her arms around his neck and her voice very small. "You going to be okay, Daddy?" Not, "I'll miss you." Not, "When are you coming back?" Just that quiet, certain statement. The way a child says something true without knowing how they know it. He thought about that now and let it settle in his chest like ballast. Then he closed his eyes and went to sleep. The next morning, Dalton came to Barrack 7 before Reveille. He walked straight to the far corner and stood over Hayes's bunk in the dark and turned on the flashlight he was carrying and shone it directly into Hayes's face. Hayes opened his eyes without startling. He looked at the light, then passed the light to Dalton's face. "On your feet," Dalton said. Hayes sat up. He was already in his fatigues. He had slept in them. Dalton stared at that for a moment. "Reveille's in 40 minutes. You have latrine duty. All 6 latrines on the east side. By 0600. Hayes said nothing. He stood up, picked up the cleaning supplies Dalton had dropped at his feet, and walked out. Dalton watched him go. Webb and Kowalski were both awake now, watching from their bunks. "You see that?" Dalton said to no one in particular. "Not a word. Not a single word." He clicked off the flashlight. "That's not normal." He said it like it unsettled him. Because it did. Hayes cleaned all 6 latrines. He was finished by 0550, 10 minutes ahead of the deadline. He stood outside the last one, set down the bucket, and allowed himself exactly one thing. He pulled a small photograph from the inside pocket of his fatigue jacket. A girl, 8 years old, standing in a backyard with a gap-toothed smile and both arms raised above her head in pure, uncalculated triumph. The way kids celebrate when there is nobody watching to perform for. He looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he put it back, picked up the bucket, and walked to the mess for breakfast. By midday of the second day, The mood at Black Ridge had shifted in a way that most of the soldiers could feel, but none of them could quite name. It was Hayes. It was the fact that he had been through 2 days of calculated misery and was still walking the same way he walked off that bus, unhurried, steady, like none of it was landing. Like he was above it, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that made you feel, if you were paying attention, that you were watching someone play a game they already knew the outcome of. Reyes felt it the most clearly. She spent most of lunch sitting 3 tables away from Hayes and watching the other soldiers watch him. And what she saw made something cold settle in her stomach. They were not breaking him, and they were starting to know it. And when men like Dalton sense that something is not breaking the way it should, they do not back off. They escalate. She had seen it before on this base. She had seen what escalation looked like at Black Ridge. She picked up her tray, walked to Hayes's table, and sat down. "They're going to do something bigger tomorrow," she said without preamble. Hayes looked at her. "Dalton talked to Briggs this morning," she said. "I was outside the office. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard your name. I heard the word formation, and I heard Dalton laugh." She leaned forward slightly. "That laugh means it's going to be public, whatever it is." Hayes was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his food, then back up at her. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. She opened her mouth to give him the quick answer, the safe answer, the one about professionalism or fairness or some principle she could name without having to look too closely at it. She stopped. "Because something is wrong on this base," she said. "It's been wrong for a long time, and I've kept my head down because I didn't know what else to do." She paused. "You're the first person I've seen in 2 years who doesn't seem afraid of it." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Something passed through his eyes. Something that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite approval, but lived somewhere between the two. "Keep your head down a little longer," he said. "And then what?" He picked up his fork. "And then it'll be over," he said. She watched his face when he said it. There was no bravado in it, no performance, just the flat, assured delivery of a man stating a fact he already knew to be true. She did not ask what he meant. She was not sure she was ready to know. That evening, in the hour before lights out, Hayes sat on the footlocker at the end of his bunk and wrote a letter. Not on the base's communication system, not by email, by hand, on a folded piece of paper he had been carrying in the same pocket as Emma's photograph. Webb watched from 3 bunks away, trying to look like he was not watching. "Who you writing to?" he finally said. Hayes did not look up. "My daughter." Webb was quiet for a moment. "How old?" 8. Webb absorbed this. He was 24 and had a younger sister who was 9, and he thought about her sometimes when the base felt particularly ugly. The way ugly places make you think about people who are clean from all of it. "What do you tell her?" Webb said. "When you write." Hayes finished the sentence he was on, carefully, like every word was a choice. "The truth," he said. Cleaned up a little, but mostly the truth. "That you're okay?" "That things are hard sometimes," Hayes said, "and that hard does not mean wrong." Webb was quiet for a long time after that. Later, when Kowalski asked him what he and the old man were talking about, Webb said, "Nothing," and turned over and looked at the wall. And something that had been sitting in his chest for 2 years shifted a fraction of an inch toward a different position, though he could not have said what that position was. Hayes sealed the letter, wrote Emma's name on the outside in clear block letters, and set it on the footlocker beside the empty coffee cup he had rinsed and kept for no obvious reason. He lay down on the metal slats, hands on his chest, and looked at the ceiling. He was keeping count, not of the insults or the bad food or the soaked mattress or the deliberate obstruction on the run or the pre-dawn latrine assignment. He was keeping count of something else entirely. Names, incidents, chains of command, who gave orders and who followed them, and who looked away, who had fear in their eyes and who had something worse than fear, who had been complicit and who had been coerced, and how to tell the difference. He was 2 days in. He had what he needed from 2 of the 7 he had been sent to document. He needed 1 more day. Tomorrow, whatever Dalton was planning for the formation yard, Hayes was going to let it happen. Not because he could not stop it, because he needed it on record. He closed his eyes, and in the dark behind them he saw Emma's face, gap-toothed and triumphant, both arms raised in that backyard in Raleigh, like she had just won something she never even had to fight for. The most honest kind of winning, he thought. He let himself hold that for exactly 4 seconds. Then he began to plan for morning. Morning came at Black Ridge the way it always did, fast and without mercy, the lights snapping on at 0500 and the noise of men pulling themselves out of sleep, filling the barracks with the particular misery of another day starting, whether you were ready or not. Hayes was already awake. He had been awake for 40 minutes, sitting on the footlocker with his hands loose in his lap, doing nothing, which somehow looked more deliberate than anything else a man could be doing at 4:20 in the morning. Webb noticed it when he rolled over and cracked one eye open and saw the still figure in the far corner. And it bothered him in a way he could not explain before he had even had coffee. Nobody spoke much in Barrack 7 that morning. There was a tension in the air that had been building since the day before. The kind of tension that comes not from a fight, but from the anticipation of one, when everyone knows something is coming, and nobody wants to be the one who names it first. Hayes dressed the same way he did everything, methodically, quietly, like each action was a decision, and he had already made all of them. He picked up Emma's letter from the footlocker, checked that the fold was tight, and tucked it into his left breast pocket. He would find a way to mail it before the day was out. He always found a way. Webb was lacing his boots 3 bunks down and trying not to watch Hayes do this, and failing. "You sleep at all?" Webb said finally. "Some," Hayes said. "On those slats?" "They're fine." Webb looked at the bare metal frame, at the still damp mattress leaning against the wall where Hayes had stood it 2 days ago, and something moved through his expression that was not quite guilt, but was related to it. He was the one who had dropped the duffel on that mattress. He remembered the sound it made. "I could probably get you another mattress," Webb said. Hayes looked at him. "I'm fine, Webb." "I'm just saying, I know a guy in supply who owes me a—" "Webb." "Yeah?" "I appreciate it," Hayes said. "I'm fine." Webb went back to his laces. He pulled them too tight, winced, loosened them, started again. "Something's happening today," Webb said. He said it to his boots, not to Hayes. "I know," Hayes said. "Dalton was talking to Briggs last night after dinner. I saw them in the corridor outside the office. They weren't quiet about it." "What did you hear?" Webb hesitated. He had been in this place long enough to understand the cost of information. Who you gave it to, and what they did with it, and how it came back to you. He had made a practice of not hearing things that were inconvenient to hear. It was a survival strategy on this base. Not a good one, but it had kept him clear of Dalton's worst attention for 14 months. "Formation yard," Webb said. "Full assembly. Dalton told Briggs he was going to make an example." He paused. He said he was going to do it in front of everyone, so it would stick. Hayes finished buttoning his jacket. He did not change expression. "Thank you, Webb," he said. That was all. But the way he said it, direct and clean and without any performance, made Webb feel, for one strange moment, like he had just done the right thing for the first time in a long time. He did not know what to do with that feeling. He folded it up and put it somewhere he could look at later. Kowalski swung his legs over the side of his bunk and squinted across the barracks. "What are you two whispering about?" "Nothing," Webb said. Kowalski looked at Hayes, then at Webb, then back at Hayes. He had the uneasy expression of a man who is starting to wonder which side of something he is standing on. He decided not to wonder about it and went to get his boots. The mess hall that morning was louder than usual. There was an anticipatory energy running through the soldiers, the specific electricity that moves through a group of people when they all know a show is coming, and most of them are planning to watch. Dalton's inner circle, Webb had told Hayes the name Diaz, and Turnbull, and the thick-necked man called Hurst, who ran PT drills and reported directly to Dalton, were eating together at the far table, with the close, animated body language of men going over a plan they were pleased with. Hayes ate his cold food without looking at them. Reyes came and sat across from him, earlier than she had the 2 previous days, which told him she had heard the same thing Webb had. "Full assembly at 0900, she said, keeping her voice below the noise of the room. "I know." "Hayes," she leaned forward just slightly. "You understand what full assembly means here. This isn't a reprimand in the office. This is Dalton performing for 200 soldiers. He does this because the humiliation is the point. He did it to a man named Garrett 16 months ago, and Garrett put in for a transfer within the week." She paused. "Whatever he has planned, it's going to be designed to make you feel like nothing in front of everyone." Hayes looked at her. "And?" She searched his face. "And I want to know if you have a plan." "I have a plan," he said. "Can you tell me what it is?" "No," he said. She exhaled slowly. "That is not reassuring." "It's not meant to reassure you," Hayes said. "It's meant to work." She sat back. She looked at him for a long moment. This man with the empty file and the quiet eyes and the 8-year-old daughter in Raleigh who understood duty. And she made a decision she had been circling for 2 days. "Whatever happens," she said, "I'm going to be in that yard, and I'm going to be paying attention." "I know you will," Hayes said. "That's why I'm glad you're here." It was the most he had said to her in 3 days that did not sound like information. She carried it with her when she stood up and walked away. The assembly was called at 0900 exactly. 200 soldiers stood in loose rows across the training yard, the October air sharp and thin, the sky the color of old concrete. Dalton stood at the front with his hands clasped behind his back, and beside him stood Major Briggs, a man in his 50s with a heavy jaw and the flat, disinterested expression of someone who had long ago decided that looking bored was the same as looking powerful. "Hayes," Dalton called. "Front and center." Hayes walked from the back row to the center of the yard without hurrying. He stopped in front of Dalton and stood at ease, hands loose at his sides, chin level. The yard was very quiet. "Do you know why you're here?" Dalton asked. "No, Sergeant," Hayes said. "Because you've been walking around my base for 2 days like you belong here," Dalton said. He moved a half step closer. "And I've been watching you, and I've been patient, and I've decided that what you need is an adjustment." From the rows of soldiers, someone laughed. One laugh, then 2, then the ripple of it moving through the group like a small wave. Dalton turned to his right and nodded.
Hurst came forward, carrying a set of electric clippers, the kind used for military haircuts. Standard issue. The meaning of them, in this context, in front of this many people, was not about hair. It was about control. It was about who owns the space a man takes up. Dalton took the clippers and held them up so the whole yard could see. "We're going to start fresh," Dalton said. "Give you a proper Black Ridge welcome." He smiled at the soldiers around him. "Who wants to watch the new man get a proper haircut?" The response was what Dalton had engineered it to be. Laughter. Some voices calling out. The sound of 200 soldiers participating in something they had been trained to participate in. Because participation was safer than silence. And silence was the same as opposition. And opposition on this base had a cost that most of them had already calculated. Reyes did not laugh. She stood at the left edge of the second row, with her arms at her sides and her jaw tight, and she watched. Webb did not laugh either. He stood 4 people to her right and looked at the ground and felt that thing in his chest move another fraction of an inch. Dalton gestured to the low folding chair that Hurst had placed in the center of the yard. "Sit down, Hayes." Hayes looked at the chair. He looked at Dalton. He looked at the clippers. And then he sat down, calmly, without hesitation, without any visible emotion. He sat in that chair in the middle of 200 laughing soldiers, and he placed his hands on his knees, and he held his head still. Dalton walked around behind him slowly, the way a man walks when he wants everyone to watch him walk. He switched on the clippers, and the sound of them cut through the yard, buzzing and bright and ugly in the cold air. "Now," Dalton said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "this is what happens when you show up to Black Ridge with an empty file and a bad attitude." He put the clippers to Hayes's hairline and ran them across his scalp. The first pass. Then the second. The yard watched, some still laughing, some quieter now, the way people get quiet when the performance they thought was going to be funny turns into something else, something that has a different weight to it, something that makes them look at the man in the chair and feel, uncomfortably, that they are watching the wrong thing. Because Hayes was not breaking. He was not white-knuckling it. He was not trembling with suppressed anger. He was not staring at the ground in shame. He was sitting in that chair like a man who had decided to sit in that chair, like this was a choice he had made, and he was tracking everything. His eyes moved slowly across the yard, not with desperation, not looking for help or sympathy, but with the steady, cataloging attention of a man taking inventory. He looked at Hurst. He looked at Diaz. He looked at Briggs, standing to the side with that flat, bored expression. And he held his gaze there just 1 second longer than everywhere else. Briggs noticed. For just one moment, something moved in his face. He looked away first. Dalton finished. He clicked off the clippers. He came around to the front and looked at Hayes with the satisfied expression of a man who has won something. "There we go," Dalton said. "Now you look like you belong somewhere." The yard gave him the response he wanted. Laughter, some applause, the performance completing itself. Hayes stood up from the chair. He did not touch his head. He did not look down. He stood up straight, the same height he had been when he sat down, which somehow looked taller than before. And he looked at Dalton with those calm, clear eyes. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. The laughter stopped a little faster than Dalton expected. He had wanted Hayes to be diminished. Hayes was not diminished. He was standing there like a man who had just watched someone hand him exactly what he needed. And the expression on his face, to anyone paying close attention, was not shame, and was not anger, and was not defeat. It was almost satisfaction. Dalton felt it. He did not understand it, but he felt it, and it moved through him like a cold draft under a door. A sense that something had just happened that he could not account for. He covered it with volume. "Dismissed," he said sharply, and turned away before Hayes could say anything else. The yard broke up slowly, soldiers peeling away in groups, the noise of conversation resuming in that particular way it does after a spectacle. Everyone reprocessing what they just saw and deciding how to feel about it. Several of Dalton's inner circle were still laughing. Hurst slapped Diaz on the back. But in the edges, in the quieter pockets, a different conversation was happening. Reyes walked back toward the barracks and found Webb falling into step beside her without asking. "That wasn't right," Webb said. She did not answer immediately. "Reyes, that wasn't right." "I know it wasn't right, Webb," she said quietly. "I've known things weren't right here for a long time." Webb was quiet for a moment. He looked back over his shoulder at the dispersing yard, at Hayes, who was walking alone toward the eastern corridor, unhurried, as if the last 20 minutes had been entirely routine. "He didn't even flinch," Webb said. "No," Reyes said. "What kind of man doesn't flinch at that?" Reyes kept walking. She thought about the empty file. She thought about the signature on the reassignment order, the department designation she could not access. She thought about Hayes saying, "It'll be over," with no bravado, no performance, just the flat certainty of someone reading from a page he had already written. "Someone who knew it was coming," she said. Webb stopped walking. He stood there and let that sentence land, and she watched his face go through 3 different expressions in about 4 seconds. "You think he started. "I don't know," she said, "but I'm done pretending I don't see what I see." She kept walking. After a moment, Webb followed. Across the yard, Hayes turned into the eastern corridor and was gone from sight. But before he turned, in the 1 second before the angle closed and he disappeared from view, he reached into his left breast pocket and touched Emma's letter once. The way a man touches a thing that reminds him why he is doing what he is doing. Then he turned the corner and walked on. In his other pocket, the inside right pocket of his fatigue jacket, there was a small device, flat and black, and not much larger than a thumb drive, that had been recording audio and was now carrying on its memory the voice of Sergeant Brock Dalton in front of 200 witnesses, conducting himself in a manner that was documented, catalogued, and entirely sufficient for the purpose it was meant to serve. Hayes had what he needed. He thought about Emma again, about that gap-toothed smile and both arms raised, about her voice at the airport, quiet and certain. "You're going to be okay, Daddy." He had one more day to go. The afternoon of the 3rd day moved slowly at Black Ridge. The way time moves when something is about to break, and everyone can feel it, but nobody can say what it is. Hayes spent the first hour after lunch in the equipment room, assigned by Dalton to inventory a storage cage full of gear that had not been properly cataloged in months. It was grunt work, the kind designed to make a man feel small, to communicate without words that this is all you are worth. Dalton had sent Hurst to tell him about the assignment with a grin that said exactly what it was meant to say. Hayes took the clipboard, went to the cage, and started counting. He was not just counting equipment. The storage cage was in the northeast corner of the base, close enough to the administrative corridor that sound carried. Dalton's office was 30 feet away. Briggs's was 20 feet beyond that, and at 2:17 in the afternoon, both men were in those offices, talking, and not keeping their voices down the way careful men should. Hayes moved through the cage slowly, marking items on the clipboard with a steady hand. His ears did the other work. He heard Dalton first, the loud, self-assured baritone that the man deployed the way other men used furniture, to take up space. "Briggs, I'm telling you, the man is nothing. He's got no record, no backing, no unit history. He's a placeholder, somebody's administrative mistake." Then Briggs, lower, more careful, but not careful enough. "That file bothered me. A blank file doesn't mean no history. It means somebody cleared the history." "Or it means he's nobody," Dalton said. "Men who are nobody don't look at you the way he looked at me this morning in the yard." A pause. Hayes kept marking items. He did not slow down, did not speed up. "You're overthinking it," Dalton said. "And you're underthinking it," Briggs said. "I've been in this army 31 years. Empty files are not accidents. They're decisions." "So what are you saying? We leave him alone?" A longer pause. "I'm saying be smart about it," Briggs said. "Whatever you've been doing, document it as training. Standard disciplinary procedure. Keep it clean." "It is clean," Dalton said. "The haircut in front of 200 soldiers was not clean," Briggs said, and his voice dropped lower and harder. "That was you enjoying yourself, Brock. And there's a difference between running a tight unit and performing." Dalton said something then that Hayes did not catch clearly, something dismissive. Then the sound of a chair moving, boots on the floor, and Dalton's office door opening and closing. Briggs stayed where he was. Hayes could hear him breathing from 30 feet away, which told him Briggs had moved to the doorway of his own office and was standing there and was possibly looking toward the storage cage. Hayes did not look up. He kept counting. After 30 seconds, Briggs' door closed. Hayes made a final note on the clipboard, set it on the shelf at the front of the cage, and let out one slow, controlled breath. Briggs knew. Not everything, not the specifics, but he knew that something was off, and his instinct was closer to accurate than Dalton's arrogance was going to allow. That made Briggs more dangerous than Dalton in the short term, and it meant Hayes's timeline was correct. He could not afford a fourth day. He needed to move by tomorrow morning. He picked up the clipboard and walked back to the administrative desk to turn it in. Reyes was waiting in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with her arms folded and an expression that said she had been standing there long enough to have made a decision. "Walk with me," she said. They walked toward the eastern yard, away from the main corridors, away from the buildings where men were most likely to be. "Briggs is getting nervous," Reyes said. "I know," Hayes said. She looked at him sideways. "You were near his office." "I was inventorying equipment." "Right next to his office." "Convenient location," Hayes said. Reyes stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, and she said what she had been building toward for 2 days. "Who are you?" Hayes met her eyes. He said nothing. "Not the name," she said. "I know your name. I mean, who are you, Hayes? Because I've been on this base for 2 years, and I have never seen anyone move the way you move. You don't react the way a man reacts when he's being mistreated. You react the way a man reacts when he's watching something he already expected. Every single thing Dalton has thrown at you, the bunk, the food, the run, the yard this morning, none of it surprised you. And a man who isn't surprised isn't a victim. He's something else." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved across the yard. Somewhere on the other side of the base, a drill was running, and the rhythm of boots on gravel was faint but steady. "You've been a good soldier, Reyes," he said. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't redirect me with a compliment." "I'm not redirecting you," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because what happens tomorrow is going to require you to have been a good soldier, and to keep being one." She stared at him. "What happens tomorrow?" "Things change," he said. "That tells me nothing." "It tells you everything you need to know right now," he said. "I need you to do two things. The first is to stay visible tomorrow morning. Don't volunteer for any off-base assignments. Don't let Dalton or Hurst move you to a different post. Be in the main yard at 0900. She held his gaze. "And the second thing?" "Trust that I know what I'm doing," he said. A long silence. The distant boots on gravel. The flat gray sky pressing down over everything. "You're asking me to trust a man whose file is blank," she said. "Yes," he said. "After 2 years in this base, watching blank files mean nothing good," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him, at that steady, unhurried face, at the quiet in his eyes that was not emptiness, but something more like the stillness at the center of a thing that is moving very fast. She thought about the way he had sat in that chair in the yard that morning, the clippers running across his scalp, and how he had looked not like a man being humiliated, but like a man allowing something to be completed. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll be in the yard at 0900, she said. "And I'm trusting you. But Hayes," she stepped a half-step closer, "whatever this is, when it's done, I want the truth. All of it." "You'll have it," he said. She nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the main corridor. Hayes watched her go, and for just a moment, something that lived adjacent to gratitude crossed his face. He needed one more conversation before the day was out. He found Webb in the equipment shed at the western edge of the base, cleaning a rifle he had already cleaned once that morning. Webb cleaned things when he was anxious. Hayes had noticed that on the first day. Hayes sat down on the bench across from him and did not speak immediately. He let Webb work through the silence for a moment. Let him feel the company of someone sitting close without demanding anything. And then he said, quietly, "How long have you been here, Webb?" Webb looked up. 14 months. "And before things got this way, before Dalton started running it the way he runs it, what was it like?" Webb's hands slowed on the rifle. He thought about it. Actually thought about it, which was not something he had done in a while. "Better," he said. "There was a sergeant before Dalton, named Morrison. Strict, but fair. You knew where you stood. You could trust the person next to you." He paused. "That's not nothing, being able to trust the person next to you." "No," Hayes said. "That's everything." Webb set the rifle down across his knees. "What happened in the yard today wasn't right," he said. "I said that before. I mean it." "I know you mean it," Hayes said. "I should have said it at the time, out loud, in front of everyone." He looked at the rifle. "I didn't." "You were afraid," Hayes said. "Not as accusation, as fact." "Yeah," Webb said. "I was afraid." He said it plainly, with the particular honesty that comes to people in the late afternoon, when the light is getting thin and performing feels too expensive. "I'm always afraid here. That's not what I signed up for." "What did you sign up for?" Hayes said. Webb thought about it. "To do something that mattered," he said. "To be part of something I could be proud of." He laughed, short and humorless. That sounds stupid. It doesn't sound stupid, Hayes said. That's exactly what it should be. Webb looked at him. There was something in Hayes's voice that Webb could not categorize. Something that carried weight, the way the voice of someone who has been in the places a soldier dreams of going carries weight. Not from volume, but from the accumulated mass of actual experience. Tomorrow's going to be different, Hayes said. Webb went very still. Different how? I need you to be in the main yard at 0900, Hayes said. And I need you to remember going forward what it felt like to clean a rifle you'd already cleaned because you were afraid. Webb stared at him. Why? Because the men who remember what fear costs are the ones who build something better when the fear is gone, Hayes said. And tomorrow, the fear is going to be gone. You keep saying tomorrow, Webb said. You keep saying things change. What are you, Hayes? Hayes stood up. He looked at Webb, this young, anxious, decent man who had made the ordinary human mistake of letting fear become habit. And he said something he had not said to anyone in 3 days, something that cost him more than the cold food or the wet mattress or the clippers or any of the rest of it. I'm a father, he said, and I am very tired of systems that break people who don't deserve to be broken. Webb looked at him for a long time. He did not ask another question. He picked up the rifle, checked the chamber one final time, and set it back on the rack with a careful respect of a man deciding to take something seriously again. 0900, Webb said. 0900, Hayes said, and left. That night was the quietest night Hayes had spent in Barrack 7. Not because the base was quiet, it never fully was, but because the particular noise of men performing cruelty had stopped. Dalton's inner circle had run out of small provocations for the day, and the absence of them created a different kind of atmosphere. Not peace exactly, but the held breath that comes before something shifts. Hayes lay on the metal slats and did not sleep. Not yet. He had one task left before he would let himself rest. He reached into his right breast pocket and pulled out the small black recording device. He held it in his palm in the dark and thought carefully about what was on it. 3 days of audio. The run interference, clearly coordinated. Dalton's pre-dawn visit with the flashlight. The yard. The conversation near the storage cage. It was not the sum total of what had been happening at Black Ridge for the past 2 years, but it was a thread, and General Whitaker was the kind of man who could pull a thread until the whole thing unraveled. He had called Whitaker's office from the one secure line he had access to, a landline in the communications room that was logged on the separate system 3 hours ago. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he hung up, the thing that had been set in motion 6 weeks ago, in a different building, in a different city, was now 1 morning away from completing. He put the device back in his pocket. He thought about Emma. He thought about the morning routine they had at home and the days he was there. Her insisting on making her own cereal, which meant there was always milk on the counter, and him pretending not to notice so she could have the dignity of the independent act. He thought about how she had started calling him Sir as a joke when she was 5, after a movie about the military, and how the joke had become something else, warmer than a joke, but still carrying the lightness of one. He thought about how she had understood on the morning he left, not because he explained it to her, he never explained it in detail to her, but because she was his daughter, and she had his eyes and the same instinct for reading a room that had served him for 22 years in this work. You're going to be okay, Daddy. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for just a second, the small, private gesture of a man allowing himself 1 moment of being simply a father before the morning required him to be everything else. Then he folded his hands on his chest and closed his eyes. He went through tomorrow in his mind. The timing, the angles. What Dalton would do when Whitaker arrived unannounced. How Briggs would respond. How the announcement would land in a yard full of soldiers who had been operating under a system of fear for long enough that the removal of it would feel both like relief and like the ground shifting under their feet. He thought about Reyes, standing at the edge of the second row, with her arms tight at her sides and her jaw set, watching and not looking away. He thought about Webb, cleaning a rifle he'd already cleaned, deciding to remember what fear costs. He thought about the soldiers on this base who had been complicit not from cruelty but from exhaustion, from the calculus of survival that a broken system forces on ordinary people, and how the difference between those soldiers and Dalton and Hurst and Diaz was not character but circumstance, and how that difference mattered enormously when it came to what happened next. Because what happened next was not punishment for its own sake. Hayes had never been interested in punishment for its own sake. What he was interested in was correction. The hard, structural, institutional kind that cost something and meant something and left the place better than it found it. That was the job. That had always been the job. He opened his eyes once in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought, one day more. Then he slept. At 3:40 in the morning, a vehicle rolled through the front gate of Black Ridge Military Base. It did not announce itself. It moved quietly through the dark, a dark sedan with government plates, and it stopped outside the administrative building. A tall man in uniform climbed out, spoke briefly to the gate sentry, and went inside. The sentry, a 22-year-old from Georgia named Pitts, who had been on overnight duty for 6 months and was not easily rattled, watched the man go inside, and then stood very still for a moment in the cold. He had recognized the uniform. He had recognized the stars on it. He reached for his radio with a hand that was not quite steady, started to call it in, and then stopped. He looked at the building the man had walked into. He thought about who he would be calling it in to. He put the radio back on his belt and returned to his post. In Barracks 7, Hayes slept without moving. His hands were folded on his chest. His breathing was slow and even. On the footlocker beside his bunk, Emma's letter was gone. He had mailed it yesterday afternoon, slipping it into the outgoing mail at the communications room between the secure call and dinner. By now, it was somewhere between this base and Raleigh, moving toward a girl with a gap-toothed smile and one-eyed blue elephant, and a certainty about her father that he intended to keep deserving. The base was quiet. The cold pressed down on everything, and in the administrative building, a 4-star general sat down at the desk of the base commander and began to read a file. A real file, not the blank one in the system. The one that had been prepared 6 weeks ago and was 47 pages long, and contained everything that Daniel Hayes had spent the last 3 days confirming was true. Whitaker read slowly. He read the way men read when what they are reading makes them angry, and they are not going to let the anger make them careless. He turned pages with a steady hand. When he finished, he set the file down flat on the desk, placed both palms on it, and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he looked at the clock. 5 hours and 12 minutes until 0900. He was ready. The base woke up the same way it always did. But something was different, and everyone felt it before they could name it. It started with the gate sentry. Pitts had said nothing to anyone about the vehicle he had seen at 3:40 in the morning. But he had the particular stillness of a man carrying a secret that was too large for his body. And the 2 soldiers who came to relieve him at 0600 noticed it immediately,
and could not get a straight answer about what was wrong. "Nothing," Pitts told them. "Everything's fine." But he said it the way a man says it when the opposite is true, and he has decided that the truth is not his to give. By 0700, the administrative building had a different energy. 2 soldiers from the gate staff had been called in early by someone they did not recognize. A composed, sharp-eyed aide in a uniform that did not belong to Blackridge. The aide had given them instructions in a voice that left no room for questions, told them to maintain their normal posts and say nothing to anyone, and left before they could process who they had just been ordered by. Dalton arrived at his office at 0730, the same time he always arrived, with his coffee and his clipboard, and the forward-leaning posture of a man who runs his own world. He was halfway down the administrative corridor when he stopped. His office door was closed. He always left it open. He stood in front of it for a moment, then pushed it open. His desk had been moved. Not dramatically, not overturned, just shifted, the way furniture gets shifted when someone has been sitting on the other side of it. The chair behind his desk was angled differently than he left it, and on the surface of the desk, precisely in the center, was a single sheet of paper with a header he recognized, and the signature at the bottom that made the blood drain out of his face in one fast, cold drop. He stood there holding his coffee cup and read the paper twice. Then he walked very quickly to Briggs's office. Briggs was already there. He was standing at his window with his hands clasped behind his back, not looking at anything outside, looking at the wall beyond the glass. The expression on his face, the one that comes when a man's worst instinct has been confirmed, and he does not have the luxury of being unsurprised. "You've seen it," Dalton said. "I've seen it," Briggs said. He did not turn around. "Whitaker's here." "Yes." "A 4-star general doesn't come to a base like this without a reason, Briggs." "No," Briggs said. "He does not." Dalton closed the door behind him. His voice dropped. "This is about Hayes." Briggs turned from the window. His face was controlled, but not entirely, the way a controlled face looks when the effort of controlling it is starting to cost something. "I told you," he said. "I told you the empty file was a decision, not an accident. I told you to be careful. You told me to document things as training procedure." "I told you to stop performing," Briggs said, and his voice had an edge in it that Dalton had not heard before. "The haircut, Brock. In front of 200 soldiers. That was not a training procedure. That was you on a stage." He moved away from the window, put both hands flat on his desk. "Do you have any idea what Whitaker's clearance level is? Do you have any idea what kind of operation he has the authority to run?" Dalton said nothing. His coffee cup was still in his hand, and he had forgotten about it. "Whatever Hayes was sent here to do," Briggs said quietly, "I think he's done it." The silence in the room was the kind that sits in a man's stomach. "What do we do?" Dalton said. Briggs looked at him for a long, flat moment, and for the first time in all the years they had been in the same building, all the years Briggs had covered for Dalton and smoothed the edges of Dalton's worst impulses, and calculated the cost of every corner they cut together. Briggs looked at him like a stranger. "There is no we," Briggs said. "Not anymore." Dalton left his coffee cup on Briggs's desk without realizing he had done it. He walked out of the office and down the corridor, and the sound of his boots was different than it usually was. Faster and less certain. The sound of a man who has just discovered that the ground he thought he owned has never belonged to him at all. In Barracks 7, Hayes was dressed and sitting on his footlocker at 08:15, when Reyes appeared in the doorway. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and she said, "He's here, isn't he?" It was not a question. "Yes," Hayes said.
Since when? Since early this morning. She stepped inside.
The barracks was mostly empty, the other soldiers already out for the morning routine, but she kept her voice low anyway. Dalton knows something is wrong. I passed him in the corridor 20 minutes ago, and he looked like a man who'd just seen his own obituary.
Good, Hayes said.
Briggs?
Briggs always knew, Hayes said. That's in the record too. Reyes looked at him steadily. Hayes, when Whitaker makes this announcement, when your identity comes out, and Dalton and Briggs go down, what happens to the rest of the soldiers here? The ones who went along with it? It was the question he had been waiting for her to ask. Not because it surprised him, but because it told him everything he needed to know about her. She was not asking for herself. She was asking for Webb, for Pitts at the gate, for every soldier on this base who had looked away because they did not have a better choice. That depends on the soldier, he said.
Complicity under coercion is different from complicity by choice. That distinction is going to matter. And the men who chose it? Hurst, Diaz, Turnbull? The record will reflect what the record reflects, Hayes said. I documented what I saw. I documented who gave orders and who followed them, and who went further than they needed to. Reyes was quiet for a moment. You've been building a case from the moment you stepped off that bus. Yes, he said. The whole time. Yes. She let that sit. Then she said, Did any of it get to you? The food, the bunk, the run, the yard? She paused. The clippers? Hayes looked at the floor for just a second. 1 second. The length of a private concession. Then he looked back up. I have a daughter, he said. 8 years old. She has never once in her life had an easy thing made hard for her on purpose by someone who enjoyed doing it. He stopped. Yes, some of it got to me. Reyes held his gaze. She'd be proud of you, she said. Something in his face went very briefly soft, and then returned to what it was. She would tell me to eat something, he said. She worries about whether I'm eating. Reyes almost smiled. Smart kid. Terrifyingly smart, Hayes said, and for just that moment, he was not a colonel or an investigator, or the quiet, steady presence that had unnerved an entire base for 3 days. He was just a father who missed his daughter, and the room held that for a second before he stood up, and it was gone. 0900, he said. I'll be there, she said. He nodded. Reyes. She stopped at the door. Whatever happens in that yard, don't get in front of it. Let it complete. She looked at him one more time, that sharp, searching look she had been refining for 3 days. Then she left. Hayes stood alone in the barracks for exactly 1 minute. He did not move, did not pace, did not check his pockets or look at the floor or do any of the small, unconscious things that people do when they are managing anxiety. He stood still, the way he did everything, with the complete, deliberate stillness of a man who has made all his decisions and is simply waiting for the clock to reach the moment where they become real. Then he walked out into the morning. The yard filled up the way it always did at 0900. Soldiers moving in from different corners of the base, assembling in the loose, practiced formation of a unit that has run 100 assemblies. The cold was sharper than the previous morning, and breath came out white in the air, and the yard had the flat gray light of a day that had not decided yet what it wanted to be. Dalton was not at the front. That was the first thing the soldiers noticed. Dalton was always at the front by 0850, always standing there when the first man arrived so that his presence could be felt from the beginning. This morning, the front of the yard was empty, and it made the assembly feel lopsided. A stage set
without its main actor. Webb arrived and found Reyes already in position. He moved to stand beside her. "Where's Dalton?" he said quietly. "Don't know," she said. "Something's off." "Yes," she said. "Just stay in position." Webb looked around the yard. He saw Hayes standing in the third row. The same approximate position Hayes always stood in, dressed exactly the same as every other day. And the sight of him standing there in the ordinary formation, after everything that had happened, made something tighten in Webb's throat that he could not entirely account for. At 0900 exactly, Dalton appeared at the edge of the yard. He did not look the way he had looked yesterday, or the day before, or any day that Webb could remember since he arrived at Blackridge. He looked smaller. Not physically. He was still the same broad, square-jawed sergeant he had always been, but the quality that had made him seem large, that forward-leaning, space-taking performance of authority, was gone. He walked to the front of the assembly, and he stood there, and he did not say anything for a long moment, which was the most wrong thing of all, because Dalton always had something to say. Then a door opened at the far end of the administrative building, the door that faced the main yard, and General Arthur Whitaker walked out. The yard went quiet, the way a yard goes quiet when something irreversible has entered it. Not a chosen silence, not the obedient silence of men following an order, but the instinctive silence of 200 people registering something that changes the shape of the room. Whitaker was 61 years old and carried every year of it in the right way. The way of a man who had spent his life doing the hard thing when the hard thing was required, and had not been diminished by any of it. He wore 4 stars, and he walked like he had earned every one of them individually. He crossed the yard without hurrying. He did not look at Dalton. He did not look at the assembled soldiers. He walked in a straight line toward the third row, and he stopped in front of Daniel Hayes. The whole yard was watching. Whitaker looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Whitaker. And then General Arthur Whitaker, 4-star general, raised his right hand to his temple and saluted. The silence in the yard became something else, something thick and disorienting. The silence of a reality that has just been replaced by a different one without warning. Hayes returned the salute, clean and precise. Whitaker let his hand drop. He turned to face the assembled soldiers, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of a man whose words had weight, regardless of volume. "At ease," he said. 200 soldiers moved to at ease by reflex. Dalton did not move. He was standing 15 feet to Whitaker's left, and he was very still, and his face had the expression of a man watching everything he has built come apart in real time. "My name is General Arthur Whitaker," he said. "I am here because this base has a problem. That problem is not a training deficiency or a morale issue or an administrative oversight. It is a systematic, deliberate abuse of rank and authority that has been operating unchecked for the better part of 2 years." He paused. Let that land. "I know this because I sent someone here to find out." He turned to Hayes. "This man," Whitaker said, "is not a late transfer with a blank file. He is Colonel Daniel Hayes. He has served this country for 22 years, with a record that most men in uniform would spend a career trying to match. He was sent to Blackridge undercover, with my direct authorization, to document what was happening here and bring it to light." The yard was absolutely still. Webb's mouth was open. He did not know it was open. He was looking at Hayes, at the quiet man with the shaved head and the bare metal bunk and the thin, flavorless coffee, and his mind was doing the fast, stumbling work of reassembling every moment of the past 3 days into a different shape. Reyes was not moving. Her arms were at her sides, and her jaw was tight, and her eyes were bright, and she was thinking about every conversation, every question she had asked, and every answer Hayes had given her. And she was hearing them all again now, in a new register, understanding the things he had said, and the things he had chosen not to say, and the precision of the line he had walked between them.
Dalton made a sound. Not a word, not quite. A short, broken exhalation, the sound a man makes when the floor gives way. Whitaker looked at him. "Sergeant Brock Dalton," Whitaker said. "Step forward." Dalton stepped forward. He had no choice. He had never had a choice. He had been operating inside a structure that he thought he controlled, and he had not understood until this moment that the structure had been running him all along. "You are relieved of your post effective immediately," Whitaker said. "You will be remanded to the custody of the officers accompanying me, and you will face a formal inquiry into your conduct, including but not limited to systematic harassment, abuse of authority, deliberate interference with the rights and well-being of soldiers under your command, and the cultivation of a command culture designed to suppress accountability." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Major Briggs will face the same." Dalton opened his mouth. "I advise you strongly against speaking right now," Whitaker said, and something in his tone closed the sentence before it began. Dalton closed his mouth. His hands hung at his sides. Two officers appeared from the direction of the administrative building and walked across the yard and took positions on either side of Dalton, with a practiced quiet that said they had done this before and had no interest in drama. Dalton looked at Hayes. Hayes looked back at him. The same level, clear gaze. The same complete absence of satisfaction or cruelty. Just attention. "You knew," Dalton said. His voice was different now, stripped of the volume and performance, just the raw statement of a man who has finally understood what he was looking at. "The whole time. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Yes," Hayes said. "And you just sat there. You ate the food and ran the run, and you sat in that chair and you let me—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that was almost, not quite, the beginning of understanding what it felt like to be on the other end of what he had been doing. "I let you complete the record," Hayes said quietly. Dalton stared at him for a long moment. Then the officers moved him forward, and he went, and the yard watched him walk toward the administrative building, and the sound of his boots on the gravel was just boots on gravel, nothing more. Whitaker turned back to the assembled soldiers. "You have been operating under a poisoned system," he said. "That is not an excuse, and it is not an accusation. It is a fact that I want you to hear clearly. Because what happens at this base going forward begins with understanding what has already happened." He looked across the rows of faces. "Colonel Hayes will be taking command of Black Ridge, effective today. Effective right now." He turned to Hayes. "Colonel." Hayes stepped forward out of the third row and walked to the front of the yard, and as he walked, the distance between where he had been standing and where he was standing now felt like the longest and shortest distance in the world. 3 days compressed into 30 feet. Every deliberate indignity and cold meal and missed sleep and public humiliation folded into those steps and left behind on the gravel as he took his place at the front. He turned and faced 200 soldiers. The yard looked back at him. Some faces stunned, some pale. Webb's eyes were red at the edges, in a way he was not going to acknowledge out loud. Reyes was standing straight and still, with the look of a woman who had trusted the right thing and was still processing what that meant. Hayes looked at all of them. He took a breath. And then he said, "At ease."
The two words landed in the yard like something physical. At ease. Not a performance,
Not a command delivered to establish dominance. Just two words from a man who had earned the right to say them in this place, spoken with the quiet authority of someone who understood exactly what authority was for. 200 soldiers shifted their weight, adjusted their stances, and the yard breathed out in a way it had not breathed in a very long time. General Whitaker stepped back, giving Hayes the space that was now his. And for the first moment since Hayes had stepped off that bus 3 days ago, the front of this yard belonged to the right person. Hayes looked at the soldiers in front of him. He took his time. He did not rush into words. He had learned, over 22 years, that the first thing you say after a moment of shock either builds something or wastes it. He had no intention of wasting it. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend this morning wasn't something," he said. His voice was even and clear, and carried without effort. "What happened in this yard 3 days ago, and what happened in this yard 20 minutes ago, are both real. They both happened. I'm not asking you to forget either one." Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted. 200 people suspended in the particular stillness of people who are genuinely listening, which is different from the stillness of people who are afraid to move, and Hayes could feel the difference. "Some of you participated in what was done to me," he said. "Some of you watched. Some of you wanted to say something and didn't. All of that is in the record of what this base has been." He paused. "What this base was. Because that ends today. Not because I'm ordering it to end. Because you are going to choose to end it. Every one of you, individually, starting right now." He looked along the rows. He found Webb's face, red-eyed and still. He found Reyes standing with the straight-back posture of a person holding themselves together through force of character. He found Pitts near the back, the overnight gate sentry who had seen Whitaker's vehicle come through and said nothing to anyone, whose silence had been the silence of a man who had made a quiet choice in the dark. "I was a single father before I was a colonel," Hayes said. "Most of you didn't know that. Some of you found out in the last 5 minutes. I have an 8-year-old daughter named Emma, and she is the reason I understand, at a level below rank and regulation, why what was happening on this base was wrong." He stopped for just a second. "Because every soldier standing in front of me has someone, a daughter, a son, a parent, a sibling, someone who is waiting for you to come home from this. And what this base has been doing for 2 years is teaching you that the person next to you is your enemy, and the person above you is to be feared. That is not what any of you signed up for, and it is not what the people waiting for you at home signed up for either." The yard was very quiet. Hurst was standing in the second row. He had not been taken with Dalton, which meant his name was in the record, but his fate was not yet decided, and he knew it, and the knowledge of it was written clearly on his face. He was looking at the ground. Hayes looked at him directly. "Hurst," he said. Hurst looked up. "Eyes forward," Hayes said. "Not with cruelty, not with the smug satisfaction of a man extracting revenge, with the flat, unambiguous instruction of a commander." Hurst straightened. His chin came up. He looked forward. Whatever else he was still a soldier, and the part of him that was still a soldier responded to a voice that spoke like one. "No one here is going to be defined by what they did under a system designed to make the right choice cost too much," Hayes said. "But every man and every woman in this yard is going to be defined, going forward, by what they do next. That is the only ledger that matters to me, and that ledger opens today." He looked across the whole yard one final time, and then he said, "Dismissed." The formation broke, and it broke differently than it had broken on any of the previous mornings. Not with the noise and loose energy of men released from something unpleasant, but with the careful, unsettled movement of people who have just had their understanding of something restructured and are trying to find their footing in the new version. Whitaker came up beside Hayes as the yard cleared. 22 years, Whitaker said, and you still know how to use a room. I had a good audience, Hayes said. Whitaker looked at him. Not the general looking at the colonel, something more equal than that. Something that had been built over many years and many hard assignments. You know they're going to talk about this for a long time, he said. A colonel goes undercover as a base grunt and lets himself get shaved in front of 200 soldiers. The investigation required documentation, Hayes said. It did, Whitaker agreed. Didn't require you to sit in that chair quite so calmly, though. Hayes almost smiled. Almost. Emma would have wanted me to behave with dignity. Whitaker looked at him for a moment, and something in the older man's expression went briefly soft. He had met Emma once, 3 years ago, at a base event in Virginia. She had been 5, and she had told him, with complete seriousness, that she liked his stars, but thought they could be bigger. How is she? He said. She's well, Hayes said. I mailed her a letter yesterday. Probably reach her tomorrow. She know what you were doing here? She knows I was somewhere hard, Hayes said. She knows I'm okay. That's the conversation we agreed on a long time ago. He looked across the now empty yard, at the gravel where the clippers had left a few short, dark hairs that the wind had not moved yet. She understands more than I tell her. She always has. Whitaker put a hand briefly on Hayes's shoulder, the way a man does when words are available, but the situation calls for something beyond them. Then he moved off toward the administrative building, where there were hours of formal process still waiting, reports to file, communications to send, the long institutional aftermath of a thing that had been broken and was now beginning to be repaired. Hayes stood alone at the front of the empty yard for a moment. Just a moment. He allowed himself to feel the weight of the last 3 days. Not to analyze it or process it, just to feel it. The cold food and the wet mattress, and the pre-dawn darkness, and the sound of clippers in the cold morning air, and the 200 soldiers watching, and the decision, made clearly and held firmly through all of it, to let the record build itself through his own endurance. Then he let it go. He had work to do. Reyes was waiting for him outside the yard entrance. She had a folder in her hand, and an expression that said she had been thinking fast and productively since the assembly ended. I pulled everything I could access on base operations, she said, before he could speak. Duty rotations, supply logs, the maintenance tickets that never got processed, including the heating unit in Barracks 7 that's been broken for 4 months. I started a list. Hayes looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. How long have you been waiting to do that? About 22 months, she said. How long did it take you to pull it together? 40 minutes, she said. He took the folder. He opened it, scanned the first page, and what he saw in that single pass told him that Corporal Maria Reyes had not just been surviving on this base for 2 years. She had been watching. She had been keeping track. She had been doing, in her own quiet, unacknowledged way, exactly what he had been sent here to do, with no authority to act on any of it. You've been building this list for a while, he said. I didn't have a name for it, she said. I just knew that if the day ever came when someone who could actually do something about it showed up, I wanted to be ready. Hayes closed the folder. I'm going to need an executive aide, he said. Someone who knows this base, knows the people on it, understands what's been wrong and what was right underneath the wrong. Someone I can trust to tell me the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Reyes looked at him steadily. Are you offering me a position, sir?
"I'm offering you the position you've been doing without the title for 2 years," he said, "if you want it." She did not answer immediately. She took exactly the time she needed to take, which was about 3 seconds, and then she said, "Yes, sir." "Good," he said. "We start with the maintenance list. Get me the name of every officer who received those 11 reports about the heating unit and signed off on no action. I want to know who decided that the men sleeping in Barrack 7 in November weren't worth the work order." "Yes, sir," she said, and something in her face, in the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her eyes, was different from anything he had seen there before. Not relief exactly, more like the expression of a person who has been pressing against a locked door for 2 years and has just felt it finally give.
She turned and walked toward the administrative building, with the folder under her arm and her stride carrying a purpose it had not carried in a long time. Webb found Hayes 20 minutes later, in the corridor outside the base commander's office, which was now Hayes's office, temporarily, until the formal transition paperwork moved through and a permanent arrangement was established. Hayes was standing outside it, not inside it, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, reading something on a clipboard. He had not gone inside yet. He was not in a rush. Webb walked up and stopped in front of him, and looked at the floor, and then looked up. "Sir," he said. Hayes looked at him. "I want to—" Webb stopped, started again. "I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" Hayes said. Webb looked pained. "For the mattress," he said. "The first day. I dropped your duffel on the wet mattress on purpose. I saw it was soaked, and I did it anyway because Dalton's people were watching, and I wanted to look like I was on the right side." He stopped. "I wasn't on the right side. I was just on the safe side." Hayes looked at him for a long, even moment. "Webb," he said, "do you know what I thought about on that bunk the first night?" Webb shook his head. "My daughter," Hayes said. "I thought about whether she was sleeping all right, and whether the blue elephant was where she could reach it." He paused. "Not the mattress." Webb swallowed. "Still," he said. "Still," Hayes agreed. "The apology is accepted. What you do with it going forward is more important than the apology itself." He straightened from the wall. "You're a decent soldier, Webb, and you're a decent man underneath the fear. I watched you for 3 days. The fear was circumstance. The decency is character. Don't let circumstance make the decisions anymore." Webb nodded. He was pressing his lips together in the way of a young man trying very hard not to show that a sentence has landed somewhere important. "Yes, sir," he said. "Go get some food," Hayes said. "Real food this time. I'm putting in the order to fix the kitchen line this afternoon." Webb looked up quickly. "The cold batch?" "The cold batch was not an accident," Hayes said. "Nothing on this base was an accident. It was all a system, and systems can be changed." Webb stood there for another second, and then he did something that he could not have predicted himself 5 minutes ago. He came to attention and saluted. Clean, straight, precise. The real version of the thing, not the reflexive gesture, but the considered one. The salute that means something because the man giving it has decided it means something. Hayes returned it. Webb turned and walked back down the corridor, and Hayes watched him go. And he thought about what it takes to bring a person back to themselves after fear has been their operating system for over a year. And he thought it was probably the most important kind of work there was. He went into his office. The desk was where Whitaker's aide had repositioned it. Hayes sat down behind it, set the clipboard to one side, and looked at the room. Just looked at it. 4 walls and a desk,
and the weight of everything that had happened in the last 72 hours, pressing down gently on his shoulders in a way that was not burden, but simply the felt presence of something real. He opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside, left by whoever had been here before the last commander, was a single pen, a coffee ring stain on a piece of scrap paper, and a small laminated card with the Army values printed on it. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Hayes picked up the card and looked at it for a long moment. Then he put it in his breast pocket, in the same place Emma's photograph lived. He had a list of calls to make. The first was to Whitaker's aide to coordinate the formal transfer documentation. The second was to the base JAG office to begin the process that would run in parallel to Dalton and Briggs's inquiry. The third was to the supply office about the maintenance backlog. The fourth, and he knew as he thought about it that it was the call he would make first, regardless of what order he had assigned them, was to his sister's house in Raleigh. He picked up the phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Uncle Daniel!" A voice too loud for a phone, bright and absolutely certain. The voice of a child who answers the phone expecting good news. Hayes felt something release in his chest that had been held for 3 days. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "Dad." Her voice dropped to the register she used when she was being serious, which was at least 3 times as serious as most adults. "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like when a thing is finished," she said. "Like the end of a chapter." He was quiet for a second. "Yeah," he said. "It's the end of a chapter." "Was it hard?" "Some of it," he said. "Yes." "But you're okay." "I'm okay, Emma." A pause. The brief pause of a child processing information and arriving at a conclusion. "Good," she said. "I told Aunt Carol you'd be okay. She didn't believe me." "She worries," Hayes said. "I know," Emma said. "But I knew." Hayes looked out the window of the base commander's office, out at the yard where 3 days of carefully sustained patience had completed the work it was built to do. Where the gravel was empty now, and the cold morning light was starting to give way to something thin and pale that might become actual sun by afternoon. "Your letter's going to get here tomorrow," Emma said. "Aunt Carol says the mail comes at 2. "I'll call again before it gets there," he said, "so you know what to look for." "What's in it?" "What I always put in them," he said. "The truth. Cleaned up a little." "That hard things don't mean wrong things," she said, reciting it back to him the way a child recites something they have heard enough times to hold on to. "That's the one," he said. "When are you coming home?" He thought about the maintenance list, the inquiry paperwork, the 47-page file that Whitaker had read in the early hours of the morning, the weeks of formal process that follow the moment a system is brought down and a new one has to be built in its place. He thought about Reyes, with her folder of 22 months of careful watching. He thought about Webb, learning to let decency make the decisions instead of fear. He thought about 200 soldiers who were going to need to relearn what a base was supposed to feel like when the people running it were doing it right. "Not soon enough," he said. "But before you forget what I look like." "I have the photo on my desk," Emma said, with the mild indignation of a child whose memory has been mildly insulted. "I don't forget what you look like." "Good," he said. "Dad." "Yeah?" "I'm proud of you," she said. Just like that. Plain and clean and direct. The way she said all her most important things. Without build-up or decoration. Just the truth, delivered with both hands. Hayes pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose for exactly 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. "I know you are, sweetheart," he said. "I know." After he hung up, he sat in the quiet office for a long moment. Then he picked up the pen from the desk drawer, pulled the first document on the stack toward him, and began. Outside, the bass was moving again. The sound of it reached him through the walls, boots on gravel, voices in the corridors, the machinery of a military installation doing what it was built to do. But the quality of the sound was different. Not dramatically, not in a way that most people would have been able to name. But Hayes heard it. He had spent 22 years learning to hear the difference between a place that was running on fear and a place that was running on something better. And the difference was not loud. It was subtle. It lived in the small spaces between sounds, in the way people moved when they were not calculating the cost of every step. He heard it now, small and early and fragile, the way every real thing starts, but unmistakably there. Outside in the corridor, he heard Reyes's voice giving instructions to someone in the efficient, no-nonsense tone of a woman who had been waiting 2 years to use her actual authority, and the person she was talking to was responding not with the dull compliance of fear, but with the engaged, quick responsiveness of someone who has been reminded that their contribution matters. He heard Webb somewhere further down the hall, talking to another young soldier, the laugh in his voice already sounding lighter, already sounding like a man who has put something down that he has been carrying too long. He heard the bass, as it actually was, under everything Dalton and Briggs and 2 years of deliberate rot had done to it. He heard the thing that had been there all along, waiting. The basic human decency of people who had chosen this service because they believed in something, and had spent 2 years being punished for that belief, and had not, most of them, let it die. He had 3 days of someone's worst behavior on a recording device in this pocket, and a 47-page file that would move through the formal process and result in consequences that would be real and lasting and just. But this, what he heard through the walls right now, the sound of a place beginning to remember what it was supposed to be, this was the part that mattered most. He bent his head over the paperwork and wrote the first line of the first document in a clear, even hand. The name at the top of the form read Colonel Daniel Hayes, and for the first time in 3 days, it was the only name he needed. Some men are broken by the systems that try to diminish them. And some men, the ones who have already decided who they are before the system ever touches them, walk through those systems like a river walks through stone. Not with force, with patience, with the absolute quiet certainty of something that knows it will outlast the obstacle, because the obstacle was never the point. The work was always the point, and the work at Blackridge had only just begun.